Sequels. Sequels. Hi again, lads, and welcome back to Book Club, but it's only books I can get views for talking about. Today, in the Drake album Prayer Hands, we have the second book from YouTuber turned author turned back to YouTuber Shane Dawson. His 2016 collection of essays, It Gets Worse. Nobody really asked for this video outright, but the views spoke for themselves, and it was clear you guys were looking for more books to burn. Speaking of which, shout out to all the people who safely threw their copies of Shane Dawson literature into a fire pit for a gag. I got a good laugh, and he still got our money off of these things. Now this is the sequel to Shane Dawson's first collection of essays, I Hate My Selfie. That was apparently an achievement so grand for Shane that it supersedes all of his other titles on the cover of this book. Not what I usually think when somebody mentions Shane Dawson, but I don't think much at all these days. Now straight off the bat, this cover is already leagues above the last one. It's entirely smooth material, no weird piss stains on it. The brown consistency of the cover actually makes it look more like a quality poo, like one that's a result of a balanced meal with protein and veggies and all the usual stuff. What I'm saying is that both this cover and poo are nice to hold in your hands just to play around with and stuff. The one weird thing about this cover though is that while it is a paperback book, it has like little folds on it. Like on the inside, it has the flaps that a hardcover book would have when you can remove the jacket. But because it's completely attached, like the pants on a fat dude, it gets thicker the farther you get away from the seam. One flap's got the book description on it, and Shane has added Publishers Weekly, Los Angeles Times, and the Wall Street Journal to his bestseller list. Still haven't found out if any of those are worth shit anymore, but it sure does look impressive if you've never read a book before. I've always wondered what the idea behind putting the description of the book inside of the book is. Like if I have to open the cover to read the pitch, at that point I might as well just start and finish reading that bitch in the middle of the Barnes & Noble's aisle instead of buying it. Save the 15 bucks. Either way, this book is described as a new collection of original personal essays. Shane goes even deeper, sharing never-before-revealed stories from his life, giving readers a no-holds-barred look at moments both bizarre and relatable. And that just seems to be the main premise of this book, just going even harder and more in depth than the last Shane Dawson essay collection. On the angle of just getting to know Shane though, yeah, the last book is more than I'd ever want to hear about him, but this one taught me stuff I didn't even know you could learn about somebody. One of the early essays is about something called chub rubs and Shane's experiences with them. And attached is a handy definition for the uninitiated. You bastards have been lucky so far, but it's about to run out. A chub rub is when the skin between a fat chick's thighs rubs together while walking, causing a mild irritation between her legs. Seems like it usually leads to rashes and other things like that. Now Shane cleverly uses a story about a time he got a really bad chub rub to teach us a lesson about how you should follow your passions and not do things your heart isn't fully into. The story goes something like this. Shane was going to college for film, but wasn't super sure about it, since he'd have to do like 3 years of general education before even getting a rat's ass of a chance to get into the film program. And he realized at one point that a part of college is walking a lot on the campus, and he got just a horrendous chub rub from all of that walking. So he gets sent to the nurse's office for it, and he spills his fears onto the nurse. And she suggests that maybe college isn't the only avenue to his dream, especially considering how exclusive the film program is. So he calls his mom and lets her know he's dropping out just after the first day, and that's when he started uploading consistently to YouTube and ended up making movies that way. Admittedly, it is a pretty interesting lesson from that story, but we got on the highway to hell to learn that shit. One of the things I criticized Shane's last book for, actually, was that some of the essays seemed completely meaningless. That some would have lessons at the end of them, but others would be like pencils after being used way too much. Pointless. And by no means did the stories need to have a point. They could have totally been rambly and be fine as that. It's just that sometimes it felt like it was building to a lesson that never came. It was all a tease and I was left unsatisfied. It's like waiting for Halo Infinite to come out. This book definitely does not have that problem. Every story, no matter how weird or like an Onion article it seems to be at the start, always ties it back to some type of lesson that it wanted to share with us. Usually based off the lesson that Shane learned from these situations himself. And it did make it a better read for me personally. It painted a more complete picture of Shane's life, and it helped me understand a little more what these individual moments mean to Shane personally. Another criticism I had of Shane's first book was how it characterized the people in his life. The way it was structured felt like I was playing hopscotch, but somebody put all the spots out of order and still expected me to jump from 1 to 2, when 2 is on the other side of the goddamn driveway. How do you want me to get there? Hop in my fucking car and drive? Namely, it was how he introduced his grandma, where he had an essay about her death, then would have her be alive a few essays later, where even though they were all meant to to be disconnected, it made reading that book a more confusing experience because it was just all over the place. The character that It Gets Worse does the best with, I think, is definitely Shane's brother Jared. That's Jared with an I, and I was gonna make a joke about how he definitely has a mixtape or something, but I checked and he actually does. Jared is, or at least was, a rapper that went by Upwards. Epic. But the way this book handles him is a lot better than the first book handled Shane's grandma, and he's built up as a kind of authority/father figure in Shane's life. The first time we see him is very early on in the book in the first chapter, which is about Shane coming to terms with his bisexuality. Sorry for getting that bit wrong in the last video, by the way. Where when Shane was gay, Jared asked him if he was gay, and Shane would say no. And it stayed like that until eventually, when Shane was older, he was able to tell Jared that he was indeed himself. And just like at the start of the story, Jared is there to support him then too. It wraps up the chapter in a nice pride flag bow. In following essays, Shane expands on that relationship, talking about what Jared is like to him. And that very next chapter, Jared is there giving Shane advice on what to do and what not to do on his first day of 6th grade. Man, that conversation has to suck to have today. Okay, see you, sweetie. Don't die at school today. Make sure you avoid all sorts of human contact. A couple chapters later, about halfway through the book, Shane puts it very clearly how he viewed his brother at that age. Our talks were usually father-son type chats. My dad wasn't really around much, so Jared was who I would go to for advice. Usually it was bad advice, and sometimes he would just ask me to cover for something bad he had done, but I still treasured these moments. Despite being told in snippets across disconnected stories like a shitty comic book reboot, I have a much clearer picture of who Jared is to Shane, and he feels very fleshed out. Another character who is well explored in this book is that of Shane Dawson's mom. She gets a lot of that same type of development here. And Shane's gift, if you will, to her is fulfilling her dream of being a published author, where he gave the entire last chapter to her and said he would leave it completely unedited. And I do like that as a premise, though I'm not certain if he's talking horseshit about that unedited part, because there was one very Shane-sounding joke in there. There was a group of kids sitting to my left, and I'm not going to lie, they looked a bit rough to be waiting to watch a drama production. You should never judge a book by its cover, but I still wrote a brief last will and testament on a paper napkin, just in case. Come on, it does seem like something Shane would write, though I guess you would have gotten his sense of humor from somewhere. Regardless, I thought that chapter was relatively sweet. People doing stuff for their moms is always a plus for me, even if I'm not sure if they actually did that thing. Another quirk that Shane has carried over from his last book is having some fan art that has to do with whatever story is coming up ahead of the chapter it's related to. And it was once again a nice little breather that let me skip pages. That being said, the art is also better this time around. Not that the last book's was particularly bad, but some of it was said to be drawn by 12-year-olds, and yeah, I'd buy that explanation. And while talking about things Shane carried over from the last book, fuck it, let's go bloodthirsty and get that Black Ops 2 care package. The way Shane writes dialogue is held over from that last book, that kind of movie scripted style where it's the person's name, the thing they say, go to next line, repeat until the heat death of the universe. This time around it stays consistent all the way through, which I am personally happy with, because that way it takes up more space with less words once again, and it doesn't pull you out of the book as much because of that consistency. And of course, old habits die hard, and Shane's using more tangents here than I did in math class. In fact, I think I managed to find the worst example of it getting in the way of the flow of either of these books for me. In a story about him making his first movie, he mentions a fight he had with his production partner at the time. One he doesn't remember the contents of, but that was important to him nonetheless. That's all fine and dandy, and honestly, the drama of it was built up pretty well, but after he says he didn't remember what made him angry then, instead of going into the effects of the argument in a timely manner, he goes on for almost half a page about how when he was younger, certain TV commercials would make him angry. You know what makes me angry? This shit, man! It is so out of place and goes on for so long in an otherwise emotionally charged moment, I'm not sure it wasn't a mistake. This was one of the only major times that I saw something like that where it really stood out, but Shane does do his usual thing of making jokes about whatever new things are being introduced and trying to inject levity into any tense situation. Though, this time around, I feel like that kind of writing is more at home. Because while It Gets Worse does talk about some dark times in Shane's life and does give us an even grosser, more intimate look at some of his personal struggles, the lens we view those events through seems to have changed. In I Hate My Selfie, it seemed a little more self-loathing, whereas here, a lot of these events are presented in a more triumphant way, and how things get worse, but we get better at dealing with horseshit the more we have it slung into our face. And one of the ways that Shane has said he consistently dealt with his strife is with humor. From Shane directly, I'm here to tell you that it gets worse. It really does. The problems you have as a kid will seem ridiculous when you get older because bigger and worse problems will come along. But you learn to deal with them easier as you grow up, or like me, you'll stop giving a shit. So yes, it gets worse, but you know what gets better? Your tolerance for bullshit. It's a decidedly more self-loving way of looking at things, where Shane examines more of his ability to survive and having gotten through all this strife in his life versus just being a bit sad that it happened. Also, the general tone of this book is a bit lighter than the last one. There is still some dark humor and for sure some gross out bits, but jokes about taboo topics just for the sake of putting them there seems to be less common. And while I do personally like the self-reflective angle Shane has leaned more into with this book, the format he does that in is a bit repetitive, and it goes something like this. The chapter title tells you the topic of the essay, and first Shane will tell you a story from his childhood or when he was generally younger that has to do with that topic. And then afterwards, he'll tell you a story from later in his life that ties into that same topic. And then at the end of those stories, he'll tell you the lessons that he learned from them. But almost every time, he makes a joke right after teaching you the lesson so that the chapter never ends serious. She never lost faith that one day we were going to have everything we ever wanted, and she was right. Her dream came true. Now, if she could just have a dream that 6 inches was considered super well endowed, then I'd be sad. If your heart isn't in it, then why spend 4 years of your life stuck somewhere you don't want to be? If you're passionate about something, give it your all, and you will find happiness. Whatever you do, just remember not to wear jeans if it's hot out, and wear anything but khakis. That's giving up before you started. In conclusion, this book is definitely more solid than the last one. It feels like the second book that somebody wrote. It still suffers from the old wounds that held the other one back, and it's still very much a YouTuber book that might fit better being read as a YouTube video, but overall I'd say that it achieved at that it gets worse motto in terms of sharing what kinds of problems Shane's had. They got more complex, the answers weren't as clear, and things were not as easy. If you're a Shane fan, you'll probably like it. If not, then you probably won't. Anyways, I'm gonna wrap this video up here. If you guys enjoyed, be sure to drop a like and subscribe with notifications on. You can follow me on Instagram at kwite.png, on Twitter at Kwite, and on TikTok at KwiteTikTok. Anyways, this has been Kwite, and I'll see you guys in the next iteration of reality.